Okay, cool.
Perfect. So I can do one of two things. I can like quickly try to run through the CHERP presentation, abbreviated version, because I don't want to suck up all the time, or if there are specific questions that you have and want me to address up front, I can do that as well.
What do the rest of you say?
Well, I know there's been questions about like you and I talked about the effect of the Inflation Reduction Act on the financing of some of the stuff. Steve, who isn't able to make it because he had a family emergency, is most versed in that, and he would have had lots of questions. But why don't you just go with the basic presentation?
Yeah,
the quick and dirty.
And
that's probably what most other people will want to hear about anyway.
Yeah,
so
that's what I was going to say.
For the purposes of this.
Yeah. We have a very casual, friendly kind of bishop, but pretend you're basically doing a presentation to the diocese, because that's probably where it's going to end up.
Okay.
Don't assume we know anything.
Okay, perfect. So then I'll start. Let me just do presentation mode too, so it looks nice. From the beginning, we will start. So I represent CHERP Solar Works, and then CHERP Solar Works is just a project of CHERP Inc. We wanted to give it a fancy name, and our goal through this particular project is to kind of start an American solar manufacturing renaissance in the United States. So through CHERP Solar Works, CHERP is helping other nonprofits across the nation build their own locally owned micro solar factory, especially targeting disadvantaged communities across the country.
Is CHERP an acronym?
Yes. So CHERP stands for the Community Home Energy Revolution Project. It used to be the CHERP and Home Energy Retrofit Project. So our roots were in energy efficiency upgrades and working with homeowners and realtors. And then about 10 years ago, Devin ran across an inventor named Kent Kernahan. And Kent has created a technology that eliminates hotspots in solar panels, which I'll go over later. And he's a prolific inventor, so he has about 60 patents to his name, probably more now. And at that point, this was like right during the Great Recession, all of his patents had been monetized overseas. So he felt partly responsible for the recession. And if you go online and search "The Great Recession, My Fault," you'll find an article by Kent kind of like belaboring what he felt his involvement was in that. So in response, he's like, I want to deploy this technology in the United States and inside nonprofits only, so I can actually push money into the local communities rather than sending it out. Like something I've never heard an inventor ever say or ever do. It's kind of miraculous. But we're here today because he decided to do things differently. And so part of his goal, in addition to like spreading solar to those who need it most, is also to teach other like inventors that they can deploy their inventions differently in ways that like actually benefit their local communities rather than multinational corporations. So this is a picture of the Pomona factory. It's the first, to our knowledge, nonprofit solar module assembly factory in the world. And you'll notice that what we've tried to do in the creation of this factory is balance workers with high-tech machinery. So there are certain aspects of solar panel assembly that you really want a machine to do, like when you're picking up large strings of cells. For humans, it's really easy to break those. But we also want to create jobs and provide training and uplift people. So we don't want everything to be done by a machine, which is what the few solar panel assembly factories in the United States are pretty much fully operated and foreign owned. What we're trying to do here is give people opportunity and use machines where we need them to preserve quality. And this is a different picture of it, but it showcases how inside the factory we've really prioritized artwork. So we have this kind of sun on the left-hand side that was painted by a local artist. We call it our donor wall, and there's names that are slowly being painted up it. We have like lights up here. We have a bunch of donated pieces of arts throughout the factory, because we want people to come and work in a space that's enjoyable. So I'm from Wisconsin. We have a lot of glass factories, and they were dark, hot, gray boxes. Like you walked in there and you did not enjoy it. You're like, I don't want to come back here. We're trying to change the idea of what a factory can be. And eventually we're cutting a hole in the ceiling that will display kind of rainbow prism lights on this balcony and back wall. That's also donated from the local artist. So we encourage our groups as they're setting up factory to really think about the art resources in the community and how they can be worked into the space. So CHERP's mission is fourfold. One, obviously we're dealing with solar, so we want to stop global warming. Two, we want to bring back middle-class jobs. That's what I mentioned in the beginning about balancing machines with job placement inside the factory. Three, to stimulate local economies. That's the whole idea of deploying this technology through a nonprofit, is so that we can work a lot of money back into our communities and to the people that need it most. And of course, all of these with a focus on justice and equity. And that goes back to like focusing on communities who have been harmed the most by climate change, or who have been disenfranchised, disinvested, just ignored. So two strategic examples, strategic advantages, from CHERP. Number one is we are using the most advanced solar technology in the world, like I mentioned. So every other solar panel on the market right now suffers from hotspots. This will be the first panel, or module rather, that won't suffer from hotspots, and I'll go over in a little bit kind of the benefits of that. And then in addition, we're using a blended nonprofit kind of for-profit business model, also sometimes known as a social enterprise, again, to drive more money into our local communities. So I don't know how technical folks are on within the church, but this just kind of goes over a little bit about the ideal PV technology and the benefits of not having hotspots. So I want to skip around for slides. So
yeah, you don't spend too much time on that, probably.
Not enough time. Okay, so I'll just quickly say, like, these little white dots on these solar panels are a hotspot. It happens to every solar panel. So like, say a bird is flying over. I have lots of birds, so I have lots of birds analogies, and they pooped on your solar panel. That shaded cell is now weaker than all the cells around it. And what happens is the stronger cells now will force their energy through that weaker cell, and they cause it to heat up rapidly. And obviously it damages the cell. It can melt the backsheet, it can melt the wires. Like worst case scenarios, it can start a solar on fire, and it can create art faults with burn through everything. So this is probably about a year ago, Walmart sued Tesla. And a few months ago, there was lots of news around Amazon taking solar panels off their rooftops of their warehouses because they were starting on fire. So with the panels that we and other factories that start later will be producing, this won't be an issue. The other thing to note is that you see the little firefighters over in the corner. With current panels, a firefighter cannot put their axe through a solar panel because they'll get electrocuted and likely die. Another aspect of Kent's technology is first responder safe solar. So the panel, as soon as it notices a problem, like one of the panels in the system started fire or something weird happened, it shuts it down. So if someone's house was on fire and they had solar on their roofs, a firefighter could go on the roof and put out that fire without having to worry about being electrocuted and possibly dying. So that's a huge advancement all in itself. In addition to, like, the panels will last longer, they produce a lot more energy, they're a lot more efficient, and there's a number of other features on this slide if people ever want to go back and see them. But they will be the most advanced solar panels on the market today. And they have been vetted. All the technology has been vetted by, like physicists at Harvey Mudd and New Jersey Institute of Technology, and there's white papers on it. So it's a real thing, not something that we've made up. And then the second aspect is this blended nonprofit for-profit business model. And this slide relates kind of specifically to power purchase agreements and how you can deploy them with your local businesses to bring money into the factory that's then directed to your local community members. But it also showcases how, I'll go back, like with a nonprofit, like there's all these levers and dials you can pull in terms of getting money into the nonprofit, donations, grants, foundations, etc. And on the for-profit side, like you can deal with bonds, investment tax credits, the IRA. The IRA also affects nonprofits in certain ways now. So if you combine them, you have like double the opportunities that you would than just like working only with a nonprofit. Do you have a question? I heard an intake of air.
No.
So I'm going to move forward. So I'm trying to run through it a little bit quickly so there can be time for questions, but kind of the impetus behind us is that we saw that a lot of money is leaving our local economies, every day and every month, especially in terms of energy bills. And so CHERP is like, well, why don't we create kind of a, depression is a terrible word in this scenario, but kind of a way to suck money into the economy rather than having it sent out. So an example of this would be, so you have your local residents spend at least $90 a month on energy. And typically our energy institutions are not located inside of our local communities. So that $90 a month is sent out of the local economy. What we want to do and are doing in Pomona is saying like, well, let's turn that around. So we can start like a local factory, which would be in this box, and we can work with it to work with like the local communities and the anchor institutions so that that local factory is now producing solar panels. The solar panels can be installed on our local anchor institutions and government buildings and school and the local community. And then the anchor institutions can actually purchase their energy through things like through a power purchase agreement and through things like the community choice aggregation, which a CCA, which Pomona has. And so that money goes into the nonprofit factory and that can be deployed to offset that $90 a month of energy bills from the local citizens. So for example, in Pomona, if we offset $90 a month for 6,000 households, that equals about $6.5 million that gets recirculated into the local economy every year, rather than being sent outside of the local economy to the utility, say. And then there's also a lot of studies that show that particularly low and middle income households, they tend to spend the extra dollars they have immediately and locally in the local economy. So it kind of creates a virtuous cycle where you like your households are getting more money to spend on things that they need. It goes back into the economy, it goes back to the workers of this household, and it's circulating inside the economy rather than being sent out. Does that make sense? Are there questions about that overarching model? It's very similar to the Cleveland model, if you've ever heard of that, which is also based on anchor institutions working with local organizations in their community to keep money circulating inside that local economy. But I will pause.
Go ahead.
Okay,
You're doing good.
perfect. So the question becomes, like, what's the better choice to purchase a panel, say for 70 cents a watt, made overseas and sold by an out-of-town company, or to buy a panel that is slightly more expensive, but is made in your own city by your local residents? Obviously, we say the better choice is to reinvest in your local economy. And here's kind of an example why, and this is that value stack that you had mentioned earlier. So for example, the Pomona Unified School District wants to put solar on their buildings, and the best energy provider that they could find to do the system was from Delaware. So if they go with the Delaware company, they'll be getting panels that are made overseas, so they're losing money there. There's obviously no local factory involved, so that's additional money that gets sent out of the economy. The Delaware company is likely not going to use local installers, so again, that's another opportunity loss. The operations and maintenance are going to be held by someone who's local. Again, something that's lost. Profits obviously are going to go to the company in Delaware. There is no kind of free energy for low and middle income households involved in that kind of deal. The school district does save some money on their energy bill, but local investors are not involved either. Looking at a separate case, so if they were to go to CHERP, obviously then you have local panels, you have your local factory providing local jobs and training. CHERP wants to have its own installation company eventually, but we also work with local installers to do panels. Like operations and maintenance would be held by your local factory. We provide like free energy to low and middle income households. They still save on the utility bill, and we can involve local investors. So all of that money gets pushed back in the local economy rather than being pushed out. And the REMI model that we have done shows that this is like about a 7 multiplier in terms of economic expansion, rather than money just being drained out of the local economy. Any questions there? Perfect. And so then here is an example of how the power purchase agreement kind of model works. So we have CHERP over on the left that helps, say, Homeboy start their own nonprofit solar panel assembly factory. And we have been working with a part of the board of Homeboy. They assigned 2 board members to work with us because they're very interested in the opportunity. They're just really waiting for our panels to get certified before they pull the trigger and actually invest real funds into it. But so you have this so say Homeboy has a solar factory in East Los Angeles. What they can do is work with a third-party owner to install solar systems on target markets such as school districts, governments, universities, communities, other nonprofits, particularly nonprofits, anywhere that can't really take advantage of the tax credits that a for-profit can. The PPA is extra valuable in those situations. And then what happens is the factory leases back the system from the third-party owner that puts up the money for the system to install it. And then the target market, say the school district, pays a local factory for its energy bill instead of paying the local utility. And then the factory takes those profits to do training, to put up community solar projects for local community members to provide free energy, or to like offset directly low middle income household energy bills. So what this kind of shows is like the factory can sell panels, and that's one way to make income. It can also sell solar systems, and that's another way to make income. But really the way that's most profitable for a factory that allows it to get ongoing consistent funding to like develop community solar projects is to sell energy, because once you establish that power purchase agreement, it's there for at least 20 years. You have that relationship, and the money then, again, money's not going out to the utility, it's coming back to the nonprofit, which will reinvest it into their charitable class inside of the community. And I'll note that with the IRA, one of the things that it does is it can eliminate, going back, the third-party owner in the nonprofit situation, because with direct pay, the nonprofit could get paid back immediately for the cost of the solar system, at least a large percentage of it. So then we kind of eliminate this leach back fee, which gives more money to the nonprofit to reinvest in the community. We have a group of people on our side like digging into the IRA. We have to wait for definitive rulings in January, but like the creation of the factory itself might also be eligible for kind of like direct pay back cost, because it does have to do with energy production and doing something in a local disadvantaged community, but not like fully definitive ruling on that yet, but it is possible, which obviously helps with the cost of the factory. Any questions there?
I have a question. Megan, do you know what the current estimated cost? So if a nonprofit wanted to start a factory, how much
Yes.
money they'd have to raise, essentially?
Yeah, right now it's about $6.5 million. Like 3 million of that, 2.5 to 3 million is equipment. So you could lease the equipment, and that's what we're recommending to folks. So that means you don't have to put 3 million up front. It's money you can pay over time. So it drastically reduces the amount of money you'd have to raise at the start. CHERP is also in conversation with some organizations by trying to get funds ourselves that we could deploy to local core energy groups. There'd still be a payback model, but it means you wouldn't have to raise as much. But those are not definitive. We're hoping to have some kind of deal settled by the early January.
Okay, thanks.
But typically what we recommend, you've worked in nonprofit spaces, you probably all know this already, but like there's a lot of state and local grants, there's local fundraising. One of our groups is going after a bond. Homeboy, has a lot of donors. One interesting thing that Homeboy has done is in the past, they've purchased a building, and then the city of LA basically gave them their money back after a certain amount of time passed, and they showed that they created the jobs they said they were. So I don't know exactly how they structured that deal, but things like that are possible in terms of like getting the space. I've been meaning to ask Homeboy exactly how they did that, but it's an interesting opportunity. It would save people a lot on rent, especially in LA.
Megan,
Mhm.
do you know if Homeboy is working with the city of Los Angeles or with the county to go through this step by step? Would you know that?
They're probably both, if I'm being honest. There are probably people both at LA County for sure. Especially on the workforce development side, a lot of the county folks are very excited.
Mhm,
I don't know exactly who they've talked to on the city
mhm,
level, but I'm assuming they're pursuing both avenues.
mhm. Okay.
Any other questions? And I'll plow forward. Awesome. So this is my favorite part. Obviously, it's in my title, but workforce development is really what gets me excited about what CHERP is doing, besides saving the planet, because I'm a young person and I want to live not in a molten desert. But one of the great things about the CHERP factory is that we can take folks, they could have a high school diploma, they wouldn't even really need a high school diploma. We can come and bring them into the factory. We can give them training, industry certifications, expose them to other areas of manufacturing, and then move them out into industry on a career path in the green energy field. So it's giving hope to people who have already faced barriers into the workforce, to provide them an opportunity for self-growth, and sustainability, and hopefully a career that is inspiring, empowering for them. So each shift inside our factory will have approximately 20 jobs per shift. And the idea that we're working with right now is for the training to last about 8 to 12 months. And part of that is because we want people to have an experience in the environment rather just being trained. And also because in order to maintain quality panels, you don't want to cycle people out every like 4 weeks. Because it'll be too hard to actually produce things if you're constantly training new cohorts. And obviously, I said we focus on the most vulnerable populations first. So, for example, right now we're in conversations with the Department of Rehabilitation and our local America's Job Centers, or AJCC. And they want to put together a program where we're training young people that have interacted with the justice system. 999 hours of the training would be paid for by DOR, and then the AJCC through their Elevate program would step in for another 400 hours of training, which is approximately 8 months of training that an individual would get paid for. And if they stay longer than that, then obviously CHERP will cover the rest of the costs. But there's so many opportunities in the workforce development world to create partnerships. We have another partnership with JVS, which is the veterans, AJCCC, who wants us to work with the veterans that they serve. I don't want to belabor workforce development too much. It can get complicated, but there are a lot of opportunities for training dollars that can be used. And once again, we want to cross-train people across the various positions inside the factory. We have talked to our local union. So if someone is interested in pursuing a union pathway, there is a road to that. We've also been working on digital badging so people can beef up their resumes when they're done as well. And I think the thing I didn't mention is that, like, aside from the factory floor positions, we want to show them kind of the other more managerial sectors of manufacturing, so supply chain or procurement, etc. We want to give them exposure to kind of all the opportunities that there are, like in solar and manufacturing in general, because oftentimes one of the biggest barriers people face is that they don't know what's out there. They have lots of talents and skills. They just don't know how to deploy them, where to put them. And brief slide of just some of the partners that I've been working with over the last few years to kind of develop out our program. And then some brief facts on the factory. So our factory can produce about 50,000 panels per year, gets rid of about 27,000 metric tons of carbon each year. The input-output models that we've run show the factory will create about 763 direct and indirect jobs combined. And then you invest $147 million into local economy over 15 years. And for every 6,000 low middle income homes served, $6.5 million of disposable income per year will be created. And so when you kind of like multiply all of that by 10, the numbers could become really exciting. And that's why we're wanting to deploy more of these factories throughout the nation, But in order to keep the money local, we don't want to own a bunch of them. We don't want to be a franchise because that takes money from local communities. We just want to use the model, deploy the model, and let people grow because of it. And on that note, so what we're doing with all of these new factories is creating what's called the locally grown power nonprofit factory network. This is a kind of a brainchild of Kent and Ideal PV. What he thought, he's like, we have these mega factories, right, in the United States, and why he's like, we should break it up and distribute it into a network of factories that are collaborative, that are resilient, that are regenerative. I said mutually collaborative, ready. And again, all focus on equity and justice in their specific communities. So as part of the network, I think this slide is very similar, so I'm going to skip it. As part of the network, some of the wraparound services that CHERP can provide are we can help with supply chain. We can do bulk orders, which will save each factory money if we can order like cells and frames and glass in bulk. Obviously, when you order in bulk, the price goes down. CHERP can help with PPA contracts. We can have networking events. The idea is that we're creating something to help our communities, but we're also connected because we're all working at a similar mission. When we're there to help each other, say like if one factory's machine broke down, maybe another one in local area could like provide them panels for a project that they were working on and now can't fulfill. Kent has worked all this into the license agreement to try to create something new and something innovative and something that strengthens our local communities.
Excuse me, Megan.
Yeah.
Who owns the factory then?
Each factory is owned by the local nonprofit. So
Right.
CHERP in Pomona owns that factory. If Homeboy creates one in East LA, they own that factory. The locally grown power network itself is also a nonprofit and will have its own board. So it can't be rolled up and sold to investor at any point. But
I see.
yeah, every factory has its own nonprofit that owns and operates it. And then this map just shows that there's a number of communities across the United States that we've been in conversation with. This isn't a full list because I couldn't fit them all in the little bubble. But there are communities all over, especially California and across the nation, who have core energy groups, which is a fancy name for basically a group of individuals that's really excited and motivated to start a factory in their community, and is working with us to kind of figure out like who they should connect with next, what potential like funding sources look like. And then like once funding has been identified, CHERP then comes in and walks them through every step from soup to nut of what it takes to build a factory from the ground up and get their production line going. And finally, we're almost there, and I can stay over a tiny bit. But so Los Angeles has a county sustainability plan, and goal 7A of this plan is to get 10 gigawatts of new distributed energy resources into the county by 2045. The problem with that in the current market is that this would require 30 million new solar panels by 2045, but all of those would be purchased from overseas, which means $5 billion would leave the LA County. And so CHERP's solution to that would be to start 15 solar factories in LA County to produce the solar and create over 10,000 jobs and reinvest that 5 billion locally and create a 35 billion GDP expansion instead. We've already started this process. One of my many jobs is to work with our student interns or an academic partner. So we had a group of students identify that you did a GIS map to kind of showcase what communities in the county are most impacted by energy burdens, pollution, incarceration. We can use that, have language barriers, etc. And then they've spoken with, so far, they chose 4 communities because there weren't a million students. Long Beach, Panorama City, Lancaster, and what's the last one? In Compton, to kind of begin cultivating core energy groups in those locations. But it's a huge opportunity. Like LA County shows that the market for solar is just incredibly large. Like 30 million solar panels would still take like between now and 2045 to produce if all 15 factories are running at full capacity. And that's just LA County alone. As shown by kind of the RA, solar continues to grow in the United States. And this is a picture of Jason with our panels. I can say that in terms of certification, we passed the fire test. So basically they lit our panel on fire and it burned at the correct rate in the correct way. So it's safe. And now we're just waiting for Ideal PV to finish some last minute coding on their circuit boards. And we will send our panels off to Irvine and drive them there, and we'll finish the rest of the testing. We're confident that everything will go well because we've been working with NREL and the electrical testing labs throughout the whole process for about a year now. And they actually had to they had to change their testing because they don't need to, our panels have so many safety features that the tests that they typically run couldn't even account for them. So it's been taking longer, but we're really excited early next year to finally be producing panels and getting them on rooftops and getting energy to the people in Pomona who really need it. And that's the short overview. It was still long.
So my
Well done.
question, or the idea that's been kicking around my head since I heard about your LA factories for the future, given that the LA Diocese of the Episcopal Church is throughout LA County and Riverside and Ventura and Orange and I don't know where else, we and other religious organizations, Catholic Church, etc., could be great partners if we fully got into this, and not only to mitigate greenhouse gases, but the justice piece, the creating jobs and stimulating the economy, and could be a great
lowering our electric bills.
yeah, and
lower your
lower
electric bills.
church elect. I mean, even if the diocese didn't want to get into the nonprofit start factories thing, we could be a great customer potentially for CHERP.
And maybe even if the solar array is big enough, get money, not only eliminate our electric bills, but get money back from the utilities for producing electricity.
Yes.
Because the peak usage times, especially when it's hot, are in the daytime. And it just saves the utility from having to crank out more electricity, and it beefs up the capability of the grid to provide that electricity, all of that stuff.
Yeah, and especially for churches, because you get hit super hard with demand charges that are absolutely ridiculous because you end up using energy at peak load times typically. It's just really sad. You're like, we don't use energy every day, all day. We use it apparently at the wrong time. So now we pay these massive demand charges each month.
That's mostly in SCE, or is that DWP also?
The DWP doesn't seem, their demand is less time based than it is just what you're using in total. If it goes past a certain tier, then it's more expensive. Another tier, more expensive, but it's not time based.
That's good.
Megan, may I ask, have you made any overtures to LADWP?
I remember, I think we had a conversation with them a long time ago. It would probably be worth following up because we weren't as far along as we are now. at that point. But I don't remember who we talked to because it was probably it was over a year ago
Yeah.
at least.
Then I have a question because, for example, Steve is in Riverside and they wanted to do a large solar array, but the local utility limits them to only producing their consumption. And apparently some of the other private utility, well, the one in Riverside is owned by the city of Riverside, but for Edison customers and others, the utility companies are trying to hang on to the money they make via generation of, generating power. And of course, they also have to figure out a way to pay for the maintenance and upgrades to the grid because they own the grid. So I've been thinking about all of this, and I actually found a video on YouTube that basically says we have to reimagine the grid as its own organism, that you have micro producers putting in and then customers taking out, but to spread the production around and either to drastically minimize, certainly at peak hours, what the generation is doing, capacity. But there was a small subdivision outside of Naples, Florida, that did this. They have, all the houses have solar panels and they have battery banks for night. And they were the only community not affected by all the damage that the hurricane did to the regular grid. So ideally, we all need to move that way. But from my perspective, I don't think the producers are going to let go of their control over the grid without a public policy intervention, probably at the state level. And maybe what we're going to have to do is imagine the electricity grid like the highway system, that it's something the state takes over and maintains. And then everybody on one hand pays for putting electricity in, but also pays for the electricity coming out at some kind of equitable fee that allows for the maintenance of the grid, but isn't tied to a profit incentive.
Right.
Which is why I brought up LADWP, and I wanted to pursue that line of thought, because we have to start somewhere. And if we're, the Diocese of Los Angeles is a vast area.
Yeah.
And it would be great to fan out all over the place and, doing this kind of, prospecting, places and organizations and groups to, be involved and, maybe try to build this out, within the context of all the churches, the Episcopal churches in the diocese. I mean, that would be wonderful. But I think there needs to be a beginning somewhere. Certainly the homeboy prospect that's a great start. And I think building on that model, if we were to say focus on the city of Los Angeles itself, where there's a new mayor who is keenly interested in workforce development, jobs, and building wealth in low-income communities. We actually mentioned that yesterday in her address about building wealth in communities, and this is a central tenet of the community care first approach. So this is right in line with things that her administration is going to be looking at. So I bring that up because I think it needs to start somewhere. There needs to be some seeds, a few seeds planted that can be nurtured and nourished. And you have a city government in Los Angeles that is keenly interested in this right now, and and there's, and it, because of the number of things that it would accomplish, starting with environmental justice, going on with climate change mitigation, going on with building wealth in communities. So anyway, I'm just based on what I saw in the former presentation and what you did just now, it just sort of reinforces in my mind that this might be a place where you might want to start. I mean, certainly the Episcopal Diocese, to the extent that the bishop is keen on this.
Daniel, I just want to have time to give her some specific referrals. So I happen to live in South LA, and we are the economic development zone. And what most people who don't live here don't know is that there are lots of small industrial buildings. I live a block south of Slauson, and Slauson is lined with them for about 4 miles. And our city council member is Curran Price, and he's established, and I would suggest that you approach his office first, because he's very keenly interested in workforce development programs in his district, which I happen to live in. Sorry to cut you off, Daniel, but I wanted to give you good information.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you want to, I think LADWP, I think the council president is the person who's driving this whole renewable energy program for the city of Los Angeles, and that's Paul Krikorian. He's council district 2, and he's centrally involved in driving Los Angeles towards 100% clean renewable energy by 2035.
Right.
So Curran Price, certainly in terms of his district and what he wants to develop there, for sure. But the person who's leading this for the whole city would be Paul Krikorian, city council member. And then, getting with the people in the Bass administration's, workforce, economic and workforce development, which they have an office of, so, and they would be able to, it would be a way to start a conversation. I'm sure, no doubt, South LA, Marquise Harris Dawson's district, Curran Price's district, over in, East LA, or the east side of LA, the council district, the council member whose name we will not mention right now.
KDL.
But these are certainly the areas, but my recommendation would be to start with Paul Krikorian's office, and I can give you specific contact info for the people who do the environmental stewardship there.
Cool.
That would be amazing.
Yeah.
Okay. I have to jump off. Megan, do I have your email?
Yes.
Oh yeah, I
one-
do have your email,
should have it,
because
yeah.
you got because you sent us the new link.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes. So
Yeah.
yes.
Yes.
Okay, I have to jump off. This is great. To be continued for
Thank you,
sure.
Daniel.
And thank you, Megan. Thank you, Ed, for pulling us together, and Scott for bringing Megan to us. And this is good. Thank you.
Also,
right.
thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Devin, Megan. To be continued. Like I said, I'm supposed to talk with Melissa McCarthy on Wednesday. Ed, if you're available on Wednesday, maybe you could join us.
I can check and see if I am. But Megan, do you have the ability to take the recording of this meeting and put it, say, on YouTube or someplace where there's a link to access it?
Yes, I will. Once it processes, I'll put it in our Dropbox and then I'll share the link with you. So then anyone can access it from that link.
Well, would I have your permission to put it on one of my YouTube channels so it's easily shared?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, just send that message, email it to me so I've got it. And I have a couple of YouTube channels, but I think the one that would be appropriate is Spirits on a Human Journey.
Ooh. I'm going to look that up.
Spirits on a Human Journey. And it's got a lot of neat stuff on it, including some great films. But no, this would be really good, and I'll put it up. And then that way, it's easy for everybody to access.
Yes.
Yeah, they don't have to have a Dropbox or anything. They just go to you, just click, put in the YouTube link. The one other comment I wanted to make to Daniel's comments is I actually bumped into Mayor Garcetti a few months ago, and we were talking about electric vehicles because I'm on my 7th EV. I actually sprung for a brand new Chevy Bolt EUV, the first new car I've bought in 40 years. And I love it, by the way. In fact, Edmunds just did a comparison with the Tesla Model Y and said that other than the fact that the Chevy fast charge is slower, it basically takes an hour instead of a half an hour, that other than that, they preferred the Chevy. It was quieter, more comfortable. You know, the controls were a lot more intuitive, etc. And they're selling them now that the base model starts at $28,000 before the $7,500 tax credit.
That makes it a lot more affordable.
So if you know anybody, and besides, you know, it's an American manufactured car. And but anyway, what I was going to say was I was talking to the mayor, and he was saying that the DWP has concerns about the capability of their grid to handle all of this. So part of when I was talking about the public policy piece is, for example, my house was built in 1923. The three lines on the back, you know, in the easement in the back, the insulation fell off of them probably decades ago. And I got a new 200 amp service, and the wires they went putting out to it that they clamped on are almost half again thicker than the wires they're clamping onto between the poles. So yes, a lot of DWP's infrastructure is going to have to be upgraded, but it needs to be upgraded anyway.
Right. You might as well do it now while you're.
Well, or start doing it now,
Yeah.
because and so that's the in terms of doing all this. The other thing I found out, I moved to Portland, Oregon for 5 years, and guess where a lot of the DWP's power comes from?
Portland, Oregon?
The Bonneville project on the Columbia River, because when the Roosevelt administration built all of that, part of the deal with, I think, the Bonneville was, I don't know about the rest of it, was the power could only go to manufacturing or municipally owned electric companies, like the DWP.
Like the DOP.
You know, and not anywhere else. So a big chunk of it comes from up there. And I was like, well, because I'd asked someone in the community I was working in, and I said, well, we've got all this hydroelectric power. He said, we don't get any of it because we have a private electric company, Portland General Electric. And he said, most of it goes to LA.
That's crazy.
And the other interesting thing about the city of LA is it has one of the lowest per capita carbon footprints in the world.
Interesting.
Because of that. Now, there's also, I think, one coal-fired generator out in the desert somewhere. Mary Nichols knows more about that. I don't know how much you know about Mary Nichols, but well, if you go to that YouTube channel, scroll down. I did the speeches from not the recent convention, but last year. And she was one of the presenters. She had just come back from COP. She's the former chair of the California Air Quality Resources Management Board.
Ah.
and
Perfect.
an environmental attorney.
Very cool.
Yeah, very sharp. She's the one that in the 80s, 70s, were you at the convention, Scott?
No,
Well, when Canon McCarthy introduces her, okay, she was hired by the city of Riverside to sue Los Angeles for all the smog blowing east. And she basically countered. She said, no, we need to sue the federal government for not enforcing their own Clean Air Act.
Wow.
So, yeah, she's very cool. And she goes to St. James, where I go to church. That's how I know her.
and she's on the Bishop's Commission on Climate Change.
She is, but she rarely shows because she's pretty busy elsewhere. But anyway, so there's all these pieces that have to come online because, you know, I'm from Florida originally, and Florida is pretty much an all electric state to begin with. The generation is usually coal fired, but the wires that distribute it are literally twice as thick as what's here. And in fact, I tell friends of mine, I said, all this wouldn't last a year in Florida, where it rains 80 inches a year with lightning and thunder and all that stuff. It just get blown away.
Right.
Anyway,
Megan, I know you need
great
to go.
meeting.
So I need to let you go.
Yeah, what I'll do is I'll trim it down to just your presentation.
Okay.